Hi folks, welcome back to the Discipleship module. This is week 5 and we're looking at section 4, initiating discipleship. And when we think about discipleship, this is often the bit that gets skipped over, not because you don't have to do it, but because people assume that it's easy, right? You just say to somebody, would you want to do this? And they go, I don't bother, and it all sorts itself out. And yet there's a lot more to it. There's a lot more going on. People have busy and awkward lives. There's loads of things. And trying to make time and room and space in your life for another person, it's difficult. It's, people who get married find one of the issues is that you're fitting in around somebody and working with them. Now, we're not saying this is a marriage relationship, but in a similar way, you're making room for somebody, you're trying to include them, you're trying to work together, you're trying to have the same goals and work things out and become a team, become part of a useful part of a community. And all of that takes a bit of effort. And one of the issues I think with discipleship is that people don't go into it very well prepared. And that doesn't mean they don't have a book to read through or a set of material or a kind of plan, but they haven't really thought through what they're committing to and how it might look. So let's think about initiating discipleship then. Let's start with, what do you need to do to prepare? What do you need to do to start a discipleship relationship? Where would you start? What do you need to get in place and know before you can start working together with somebody? I'm going to give you a few suggestions and thoughts. There's not really a definitive answer to this in the sense that the books and material online, they talk about the discipleship program they've created, but they don't talk about the getting in part of the program. Some of the courses that you'll see about, like Alpha, does a bit of an introduction, and the introduction is essentially, what are we doing here? How does it fit together? What are we asking of you? And a bit of preparation and planning so people know what they're getting into. I think one of the reasons discipleship relationships sometimes fail is because people don't really know what they're getting into. And I will be honest, discipleship relationships very often fail because we try and maybe things don't fit together as we expected. Maybe they're not as easy a person for you and to understand and for them to understand you. Maybe there's a little bit more going on. So having a thought before you get into something, being prepared, can really essentially reduce the risk of failure. Just as before you get married, people do marriage classes and prepare, not just for the wedding, but for the marriage. There's got to be more in preparation in terms of preparing for this kind of relationship, for working together, for trying to achieve something. So let me give you a few pointers on some of this. Let's start with this idea of self-assessment, which is what I've put here. I've gone past it there, but the idea of self-assessment. Before you get into a relationship trying to disciple somebody, work out what it is that you want out of this. And that's not being critical. We all have motives and thoughts, and some of our motives are good and inspired by the Holy Spirit, and others are bad, inspired by the sinful nature. We want different things in life. We value different things. So sometimes I want to disciple somebody because I value being useful to people. And so it's not really about them. It's all about what I like and what I think is good about me. And that's not very wise. One of the more concerning ones that I'm aware of, and I've had difficulty with myself in the past, is being attracted to somebody and then trying to disciple them. That's not a good way to go. You mix what you're trying to do for the Lord with what you're trying to do for you, and you end up being more of harm than good. And it's down to, your attitude will be what you want to get out of this, as well as trying to help them get something out of a discipleship relationship. If you're helping somebody, or if you're asking somebody to help you, be aware that attraction's a problem rather than something good in this kind of relationship, because then you're pulling at different goals. It's pulling different directions. So think through, well, what am I in this for? And think through the sort of person that you're asking. Are you asking a person because it's convenient? They might be very different from you in how they think and work, and it might be very awkward. You might not find each other easy to get on with. One of the best discipleship relationships I had was with a guy at Queen's. I was just messaging him not that long ago, and he asked me would I disciple him. I was a couple of years ahead of him, and I said yes, I would. And we got together, and he said, well, I said let's read some Bible stuff, and then the two of us read this Bible passage, and we answered each other's questions. And I thought, he doesn't need answers and questions, and he needs to do living this out. He needs to try something, to take a risk with people. And so I said, like, this, for this discipleship relationship, we're not going to read the Bible together. Now, I'm not saying we're not going to read the Bible, but I'm saying that's not what we're going to do. We're going to go and we're going to get involved in some of the outreach programs of the Christian Union. We're going to go and take coffee to drunk people, and we're going to try and share our faith with people through the different programs we can get into, because actually what you need is not more answers, but seeing it lived out, trying things, taking a risk. And it worked really well. But I'd gone into it thinking, yes, this is a nice sound guy. The two of us will get on. And my goals for the whole thing were, this will work out quite well. But I really should have thought through more before I went into it about the kind of guy he was and what he really needed and how we would work together. And that kind of assessment of yourself and the person you want to work with is sort of saying, well, what problems will there be between the two of us? Will it be that we don't get on? That wasn't the case in that situation. Will it be that we aim for different things? Will it be that there's some internal struggle and so on? Have a bit of thought in preparing. We often we find somebody who's just new to their faith and we think, oh, I'll help them. I can do that. We don't think we've got more in us than maybe helping somebody new in the faith. And yet actually helping somebody who's new in the faith is a huge job and much more difficult than helping somebody who's been a Christian a little bit longer and who has built up routines and plans and so on. So maybe we should be thinking through the kind of people we would like to partner with, and be careful about those decision-making processes, that it's not about myself and my desires, but actually about somebody that we think we could support and we could envisage something good coming from what we could do together. So assessment of yourself and the person you're working with and what your goals might be will help you think about what you might get into when you're doing a proper discipleship relationship. The next thing is then to spend some serious time in prayer. To sort of ask God, is this the right thing? But just saying, is this the right thing? Is that going to help you get an answer? Maybe you should be looking at some of the things that make it the right thing and asking God questions about that. Will we get on? I know it's a simple thing, but people with very different characters, and sometimes it's a struggle just to be comfortable and to get on with somebody. That's not going to be a good discipleship relationship. You're going to be awkward. You're going to look for excuses not to see them. On the other hand, sometimes you get on so well, but you realize you're not really pushing to change anything or see something happen. Maybe you ask God, is there something I can help them with? Is there something that I can do that might be useful on their journey? Maybe, they look like they're quite an evangelical, outreaching kind of person, and maybe I could teach them how to share their faith. Maybe they're a very quiet person, and doing that will make it really difficult for them. The same activity might be really helpful to one person and really not very helpful to another. And thinking through that and praying through that is important. I'm not saying you should be the same kind of person, you should like the same kind of things. Actually, sometimes that's too easy. And then you've very little you can contribute there. You just have a chat and enjoy life, but you're not really helping each other grow. So what is it that God thinks you could do in that relationship? What are the circumstances that have brought the two of you together at different times? And why would it fit in those circumstances for you to give them this kind of support? If you're saying, well, I'm looking for somebody to support me, well, what is it you're asking for? What kind of person? Ask God openly, what kind of person should I be looking for? What is it that I want help with? How could they encourage me? Not just, I like so-and-so, is that going to work? I'm friends with them and they're an older Christian. Should I ask them? But actually more about what ways do I need to grow? What does God want to do with you? And so when you're praying, it shouldn't just be, is this the right thing? Yes or no? And then you open your Bible until you see the word yes or the word no, and you go, okay, he said yes, let's just do it. No, it's a lot more complex than that. You ask God, well, what could I achieve? What could change? What could you do, God, with the two of us if we do this together? So have a serious time in prayer over what it might look like. Then have some kind of plan. If you're thinking, well, I could help them with this, or I need help with this, then that's part of your plan for what you think this discipleship might look like. You might think, well, they're going to university in 3 months. So I've got 3 months to invest here, or 4 months. What can I do in 4 months? What can I encourage them to get into the habit of, or try and help them with, or do? And have some ideas on the time scale and what you hope you might achieve. And obviously, if somebody's going to university, you're thinking, right, what can I do before they go to university? But how can I support them in prayer while they're away? How much of this is about me continuing to text them and to support them when they've gone? How much of this is about when they come back for holidays and encouraging them and giving them things, gifts that might help them? All those things, having some kind of plan. Now, if you go into it with all the plan and don't include them in the planning part, you'll end up with a very skew-with kind of conversation. But if you don't have any plan at all, any ideas of what you're trying to do, then when you have the first conversation, it'll be very confusing and you'll be very lost, and the two of you will be looking at each other thinking, I don't know. Some of you think about group programs. Well, often group programs use particular books, like Alpha uses the Alpha course, Discovering Christianity, Christianity Explored. They all have little programs laid out. It's to make the planning part easier. But even in those group situations and in those cases where the material is provided for you, you need to have a plan for how you'll adapt it, for what things you'll include. Are we going to do a meal? Is it going to be one meal? Is it going to be a meal every week? Are we going to try and make this conversational, kind of sitting around the kitchen table kind of feel, or are we going to make it a little bit more study vibe? And all these things that you would adjust and you would change. And even in those things, you're, again, praying about the people that you're going to bring to that sort of program. You're not just going, oh, we're doing Alpha, let's do that. Well, who are you doing Alpha for? Who are you bringing along? Alpha can be very successful if you bring the right people to it. If you don't bring anybody who's in the place that needs it, it's maybe no use, not much of a direction at all. So having some kind of plan, having some kind of idea of what you would like to do is good. There are many, many discipleship models and loads of discipleship material. There's tons of it in the books that I've got at the church, on the church website even, there's different programs. There's lots of ideas for material. The material's not the issue. the idea of what you're going to do together is important. I think of some of the folks in the church who did disciple a few folks a few years ago, and the impact that's still having on that friendship and relationship and on the church as a whole. The time they spent preparing and planning and doing something together has made a massive change to the church. So have some kind of plan, have some kind of thought. And then at some point, you've got to take a risk and ask somebody and ask them to take a risk. You know, as I said, if you're doing it based on what you feel like and what you want from these things, you're asking somebody to take a risk on your feelings and your ideas. But what we really want to do is say to somebody, look, I have some ideas for some things that might encourage you. Can I help you with that? Would you like to try getting together every now and again or regularly to help you grow in your faith? Or the other side of things, if you're asking somebody to help you, you're saying, I see some good characteristics in you that encourage me and have helped my faith. Could you help me out a bit more? Would you take time to help me with some discipleship? There's a few areas I would like to grow in, and I think this would be something you could help me with. So asking somebody can seem a very daunting task, but you're not asking them to something that's crazy or rude or weird or odd. And if they say no, you've lost nothing and they've lost nothing. But be prepared before you ask, and then ask and see if somebody's willing to do that. If you need advice, ask advice. If you want help, if you've got friends and you know, whether they're ahead of you or around you, and you say to them, look, I could do with some help in such and such an area. Do you know of anybody who might be able to help me with that? I would like to grow in so on and so forth. Who do you know that would be able to help me? Do you think they'd be willing? Would that be a good partnership? I don't advise getting into a discipleship relationship with somebody you barely know. There's some value to talking about it, to trying things, to doing a bit with people you haven't met. And that's where Alpha sort of settles people in before it takes them on a journey. They have conversations to get to know each other before they try and do any of the discipleship stuff. That's why they have a meal together. So you start to feel like you know people before you go forward. But jumping into these kind of relationships, it is a big thing, because you commit a certain amount of time, a certain amount of effort and energy to somebody. And there are people that will drain you and cause you to struggle, and you think, oh, why did I do that? Be prepared for someone to say no. And if you feel like it's not the right plan, be prepared to say no yourself. If you talk to somebody and you think, actually, I've made a mistake here, it's hard to admit that. And you're not saying you're a rubbish person, I don't want to do this. But if you don't take the stand and say, I shouldn't have said that, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have got into this. But if you don't do that, you'll make things worse. So really do think about it. Ask somebody, give it a shot. It will be a risk. But when you do, be aware that sometimes these relationships don't work out, that be aware that sometimes it doesn't go the way you expect it to go, but hope that God can do good things. The church is meant to be a network of people, a family, a community, a building brought together, a body that's full of many parts. But there's connections in all of those pictures. There's something that one is built on another, that there's connections. If you think about building a wall, one brick is not connected to every brick on the wall, but there's about 6 bricks around it it's connected to, 2 above it, 2 below it, 2 beside it, and it's part of that network. And without that brick, something gets out of shape. When we're doing these kind of building these kind of relationships. We're saying, well, like, I might not be the best, most sparkling thing in the world, but I'm part of this construction, part of what God's doing, and I need people around me, and the people around me will need me too. So let's think about that. The second question really for today is, what would you discuss when you have a sort of initial meeting with somebody? What are you trying to set out? What are your goals? What are you looking at? When you start a discipleship relationship, as I said, you should be a little bit prepared. Whether you're asking somebody to disciple you, or whether you're asking somebody if they want to be discipled, there should be some preparation, some ideas, and some things behind it. But what then would you have a discussion about? What are the first things that you want to know about what it is you're going to do? I would say a lot of these things are the same for group discipleship as well as for individuals. There should be a lot of the same ideas. So what would you be discussing? Sit down with you say, what we're going to do discipleship, and then you say, well, what do you mean? Well, I mean, what is it we're trying to get across? I think one of the things, the first thing is setting a time scale. That might be dictated by circumstances. If somebody is in a job for a certain period of time, in church for a certain period of time, going to university at a certain period of time, or coming back, or all these different things, a time scale or time frame can sort of be obvious. Some of the good discipleship relationships I've had, we've really spent 6 months, a year, maybe 2 years, maybe 3 years on time together. But 15 years later, we're still connected. We're still concerned about one another. We're still praying for each other. So a time scale doesn't mean I will talk to you for X amount of time and that's it. But it's saying we will have a dedicated time of certain activities for such a period of time. The time scale also includes what time you need invested during that period. So let's say I say, right, I want to help you for 6 months to see if we can grow. What is it? Do we meet up every week for 6 months? Do we meet up 4 times a week for 6 months? Do we meet up every month for 6 months? What is the time scale, and what is the commitment? What are we asking somebody to commit to? Are we asking them to commit to memorizing things, doing loads of meeting up loads of times, getting through a lot of material, studying a lot of stuff? Or are we asking them to sit down, have a chat and a cup of tea? Are we asking them to take time away from their families? Which is, for some folks, it's a big deal to get an hour a week away from their house. It's a big deal to be somewhere else. So what is the commitment we're asking people to get into? We said to them, look, I know you work 9 to 5 and you've got a family, but I want you to give me 4 hours a week. It's going to be difficult. 1 evening a week, that's a lot of time. It's a lot of time for you as well. So what are you asking somebody to commit to? Are you asking them to commit to loads of things in their own time as well? So we'll meet up for an hour a week, but between that and next week, I want you to have read 8 chapters. I want you to have memorized a verse. I want you to have prayed for 20 minutes a day. None of those things are wrong, but be aware of people's limits. We think back to Jesus and the disciples. Some of them, he just calls them out of the blue. Come with me. And they go, aye, all right. And it seems like so out of the blue, but Jesus has been praying and preparing. And out of this massive crowd, he chooses these 12 through prayer and preparation. And then he gets them to commit. He knows his time scale. It's going to be 3 years. It's going to be full on for 3 years. They're going to be with him all the time. They're going to watch his daily life. He's asking them to commit to everything. He says, if you aren't willing to take up your cross and follow me and die to the world, well, then you can't be my disciple. But he's looking at all these steps of commitment and he's asking them. And he knows what it is he's calling them to. The third thing that's very helpful is to sit down together and discuss what areas can I help you with? What are the goals? You know, if you think you need discipled, well, what do you need discipled for? Is it you just feel a bit weird in church? Well, a lot of people feel a bit weird in church. That's not it. That's not going to change it. What is it you want discipled in? Is there more to your faith that needs to grow? Is there something specific that you want to develop? Goals can be lots of different things. It might be characters, attributes that you want to change. You feel like you're not compassionate enough. You're not peaceful enough. You struggle with grace. You struggle to forgive people and you feel a bit bitter. Things like that, God can change. And a good discipleship relationship can sort of help you with those things. Others have other goals that are more to do with getting and learning and growing in, you know, maybe it's even passing a course or doing something that you want support with. Others, it's more just about taking risks and trying things that you're not comfortable with and being stretched and God doing something new with you. There's lots of ways to set goals, but set some goals, have some conversations about, well, what do you think we could do here? What could we change? What could be done if we spend X amount of time for X amount of weeks or months or years? What are we hoping will be achieved in that? And the good thing about setting goals for a few months' time or a 6 months' time or a year is that at the end of that, it doesn't mean that the relationship's over. Maybe you set new goals. Maybe you try something different. Maybe it is time for both of you to move on to do something more. But as you work with those goals and see change, it encourages both of you and it helps you think about what more might look like in the future. So within setting goals, you're thinking about the activities. Is it meeting up? Is it having a cup of tea? Is it eating together? Is it going and doing something together, trying stuff and doing outreach or writing something or prayer, or what is it that the activities you're going to do are? I had a really good friend and I just tried to get him to pray naturally, not like you do in church, just comfortably, honestly with God. Something like that was massive in his life and transformed him as a person. That kind of activity, you think, well, it's not much time and commitment, but learning to pray can be huge. What are the activities that we're going to get up to? And what is that going to achieve? So all of these things are connected. One of the things that people forget sometimes is to set some limits. You're saying you can help with some things, but you are not the answer. Jesus is the answer in the end. So when people expect too much of you, you have to manage those expectations. You need to start, maybe not right away, but you need to set some limits, saying, look, I can give you a few hours a week. There was a young guy came to the church a few years ago. He'd just become a Christian. And he would ask me for help. And I would meet up with him and help him. And then he would ask for things to go and do at home, things to read, things to Bible passages and so on. And I would give him some things to read for the next week. And I would get a text the next morning. I've read those. What's next? What else can I read? I understand where he's coming from, but I didn't reply to a text like that. Not because I don't care, but because I needed to set limits. If I couldn't give him the amount of material that he was trying to soak up, and it was great that he wanted to soak up so much, but I couldn't give him more. I couldn't constantly come up with new things or more plans. My commitment was to meet him every week or every couple of weeks, to give him things to do and to encourage him to do them. And that's what I could commit to. We need to be aware of our limits and not just try and overcome our own limits. Well, I can do more if I really struggle. in the end, you end up not having anything left to give. Setting limits is also healthier for a relationship in terms of the wider community and the church and the people you're connected to. If they want to sit beside you every week at church, if they want all of your attention, whether they're discipling you or you're discipling them, it ends up feeling like a drain, and they're not building the other connections that they need in the church. They're not working in a wider church context and getting to know more people and doing more things. It's not that it's wrong to disciple somebody, but you want to help them be part of the bigger body. And in relying a lot on one person, you're not relying on the rest of your church family. So be aware of limits. If you message somebody and message somebody and message somebody and get nothing back, listen, be aware that that's their limit. Be aware that maybe you're asking more than they've got time for. Do we think through all of that and listen and prepare well? Do we ask people, and then when we ask them, do we sit down and discuss what we think might work? I struggle sometimes because I see the value in discipleship one-to-one, and yet there's so many expectations of bigger things in the church. And yet the reality is the most impacting, the biggest thing that I can do, just like I said about Jesus with his disciples, the work that he did with Peter made much more of a difference than the work that he did with 10,000 in a crowd, because Peter went and spread the gospel himself. And sometimes this is too important to let go, and we should be thinking about it. Have you then been thinking about somebody and praying about somebody that you could work with and encourage and help? Have you thought through the commitment that might look like, the time scale, the goals for that? What could you be doing? And would you be willing to have a discussion with that person to say, well, I've been friends with you for a while, but I want to help you, or I need help with this, and it's going to take more than just being friends. Those kind of real strong relationships bond together the church. They make us all stronger if we work together on them. So have a think about it, and then think through the possibility of actually making this happen. How would you go about that? Hopefully that's been helpful to you, and I'll see you on Wednesday or Thursday.